Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in Station Erebos had the flat, metallic taste of recycled life. Kale tasted it in every ration bar, felt it as a dry film on his tongue every morning cycle. For 3 standard years, he had breathed this manufactured atmosphere, patrolled these sterile corridors, and filed reports that vanished into the hegemony's insatiable data archives. He was a compliance officer, a title that sounded important but meant he was little more than a janitor with a pulse rifle, ensuring the station's protocols were observed by men and women who had long since forgotten the reason for them. Karen, the planet below, offered no respite. Through the reinforced plasteel of the observation decks, it was a smear of ochre and rust under the glare of its binary suns. A world baked into submission, valuable only for the unique geothermal energy bleeding from its core, an energy source the hegemony coveted with a zeal that bordered on religious. Station Erebos was the tap, the processing plant, and the prison, all in one grim package. Kale had once been a legionary. He had fought on worlds where the sky was a different color every day and the air tasted of pollen and rain. He had carried the hegemony's banner into the heart of rebellious systems and held the line against alien incursions that were never recorded in the public chronicles. He had seen enough violence to last a dozen lifetimes and had earned the scars, both visible and not, that came with such a career. Erebos was supposed to be his retirement, a quiet, final posting where the only enemy was monotony. He had come to find that monotony was the most insidious foe of all. It did not kill you with a plasma bolt. It eroded you, grain by grain, until all that remained was the hollow shell of a man defined by his duties. His morning briefing was with Overseer Valerius, a man whose face seemed to have been carved from the same unforgiving rock as Karen itself. Valerius had been Kale's commanding officer in the 7th Legion, and their relationship had settled into a kind of weary, unspoken understanding. They were 2 old soldiers put out to pasture, overseeing a machine they no longer believed in. Compliance report for Sector Gamma is logged, Kale said, his voice flat in the sterile confines of the Overseer's office. The only decoration was a holographic flag of the hegemony, its stark black and gold emblem shimmering with unnerving perfection. Valerius did not look up from his data slate. Any deviations? Subprocessor 4B is running 0.3% below optimal efficiency. Maintenance has been notified. Otherwise, the sector is quiet. It is always quiet, Valerius murmured, a statement of fact, not a complaint. He finally looked up, his gray eyes holding a familiar weight. There's a new assignment for you. A rotation. Anomalous containment. Wing Zeta. Kale felt a flicker of something cold in his gut. Wing Zeta was the station's heart of darkness. It was the place whispered about in the mess hall, the destination for personnel who had outlived their usefulness or their discretion. It housed the reason the hegemony was truly here. Not just for the energy, but for the source. I thought my duties were in Gamma Sector, Kale stated, keeping his tone level. Warden Scath requested you specifically, Valerius said, and the cold flicker in Kale's stomach intensified. Scath was a zealot, a man who saw hegemony protocol as scripture. He and Kale had an unspoken animosity, a clash between a man who followed orders and a man who had learned to question them. He says he needs an officer with a legionary background. Someone who won't be unsettled. Unsettled by what? Valerius leaned back, the synth leather of his chair groaning in protest. By specimen 734, the native life form. The reason this station is more fortress than refinery. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Your clearance has been updated. The briefing files are comprehensive. Do not deviate from the containment protocol, Kale. Not by a millimeter. Scath is looking for any excuse. Kale gave a stiff nod. Understood, Overseer. The walk to Wing Zeta was a descent. Each security checkpoint led to a corridor that was colder, quieter, and more heavily armored than the last. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and chilled metal. The final door was a meter-thick slab of reinforced alloy that hissed open to reveal a circular chamber, stark white and bathed in a harsh, clinical light. In the center of the chamber, behind a shimmering containment field of pure energy, was the cell. And inside the cell was specimen 734. The reports had called it a monster, a creature of immense and uncontrollable power, a feral beast that had incinerated the first contact team. The grainy pick feeds showed a blur of motion and destructive energy. But the being Kale saw was nothing like that. He realized with a jolt, was humanoid in shape, tall and slender, with skin that seemed to drink the harsh light and soften it into a pearlescent luminescence. Her limbs were long, her form graceful even in the stillness she now maintained. She was held in place by a series of glowing metallic restraints that clamped around her wrists, ankles, and torso, tethering her to the center of the cell. Her head was bowed, a cascade of what looked like fine, silver filaments hiding her face. She was utterly still, a statue of captured light. He stood there for a long time, watching. The protocols were simple. Monitor the vital signs on the console outside the cell, ensure the containment field remained at full power, and log any and all activity, no matter how minor. There was to be no interaction, no communication. She was an object, a dangerous variable to be managed. But Kale had seen too much of the galaxy to believe in simple monsters. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the subtle, rhythmic pulse of light under her skin that matched the biofeedback readouts for a resting heart rate. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. This was not a mindless beast. This was a prisoner. He spent the next 3 shifts in that silent, white room, his only company the low hum of the containment field and the still figure within it. He read the files. The hegemony had found her deep within the planet's crust, in a chamber where the geothermal energy was most concentrated. They believed she and her kind, if there were others, were the cause of the energy, or at least its regulators. They had captured her to study, to control, to exploit. The official report called it a necessary pacification. Kale, reading between the lines of redacted text and clinical jargon, called it an abduction. On his 4th shift, he noticed something the automated systems had not logged. Her lips, visible beneath the curtain of silver hair, were cracked. The nutrient paste delivered through the automated system was a calibrated slurry of proteins and minerals, but it contained minimal moisture. The cell's atmospheric recyclers were brutally efficient, scrubbing all humidity from the air. She was slowly, methodically being dehydrated. It was a small thing, a detail, a calculated measure of control, perhaps. Keep the specimen weak, docile. But to Kale, it felt like a profound cruelty. A line drawn not for security, but for dominance. He looked at the control console. Warden Scath was monitoring the wing remotely, but his attention was divided among a dozen sectors. The automated logs would record any override, but a minor fluctuation in the cell's internal systems might go unnoticed for a short time. He had spent years following orders, years burying the man he used to be under layers of protocol and discipline. He survived by not caring. But standing there, in that silent, sterile room, looking at the parched lips of a captive being, a flicker of the old Kale, the man who once fought for something more than a pension, stirred. It was a transgression, a violation of a dozen different hegemony regulations. It was madness. He keyed in his command code and accessed the cell's environmental controls. He found the aqueous dispenser, a system used for sanitation cycles and rarely activated. He overrode the lockouts, his fingers moving with a speed and certainty that surprised him. He programmed a single, quarter-liter dispersal. Not a flood, just a cup of water. Inside the cell, a small metallic nozzle extended from the wall, and a stream of clear, pure water trickled into a shallow basin on the floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the profound silence. For a long moment, the prisoner did not move. Then, slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. Her face was not monstrous. It was angular and serene, with high cheekbones and a wide, solemn mouth. But her eyes held him captive. They were large and dark, like pools of liquid night, and in their depths, galaxies seemed to swirl. They fixed on him, looking not at the console, but through the plasteel and the energy field, directly at him. There was no anger in them. There was surprise and a deep, ancient weariness. She looked from him to the water. With a visible effort that sent shudders through her body, she strained against her restraints. It was not enough. She could not reach it. Kale watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had done this pointless, cruel thing, offered a drink to someone who could not take it. Cursing his own stupidity, he worked the controls again, manipulating the cell's limited gravity plating. The basin slid across the floor, the water sloshing, until it stopped directly beneath her head. She lowered her face, and for the first time in what he suspected was a very long time, she drank. When she was finished, she raised her head again, and her eyes met his. And then something happened that no protocol could ever have prepared him for. A feeling washed over him, not a sound, not a word, but a pure, unfiltered sensation. It was a wave of gratitude so profound, so overwhelming, that it made his knees weak. It was a silent, heartfelt thank you that echoed in the deepest parts of his mind. In that same instant, the lights in the chamber flickered violently. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the floor, and every console in the room sparked, alarms blaring to life. A voice, sharp and furious, crackled over his comm unit. "Compliance officer, what is happening in there? Report. The primary containment field is fluctuating." It was Warden Scath. Kale stared at the prisoner. Her eyes were wide now, not with fear, but with a dawning awareness. The faint light under her skin was growing brighter, pulsing in time with the station's shuddering. His small act of kindness had been a key in a lock he did not know existed. He had given her more than water. He had given her a connection, a spark of recognition, and in doing so, had awakened something within her. The main power reading for the containment field on his console plunged into the red. With a sound like tearing reality, the shimmering wall of energy that held her captive dissolved into a shower of harmless golden sparks. The metallic restraints holding her snapped, their glowing circuits extinguished. She was free. The station screamed. Red klaxons bathed the corridor in a hellish, strobing light. The heavy blast door at the far end of the chamber slammed shut, sealing them in. Kale's pulse rifle felt impossibly heavy in his hands, and utterly useless. Warden Scath's voice was a venomous shriek over the comm. "Officer, you are relieved. Security teams are en route. Do not engage. I repeat, do not." The comm cut out, replaced by a blast of static. The woman, specimen 734, slowly lowered her arms. She rubbed her wrists, her movements fluid and deliberate. The luminescence of her skin brightened, casting soft shadows that danced on the stark white walls. She was not looking at him as a threat, but as a curiosity, a piece of a puzzle she was just beginning to solve. Kale knew his life, as he had known it, was over. He had broken the single, most important rule on Station Erebos. When Scath's teams arrived, they would not be there to rescue him. They would be there to sterilize the situation. He was a loose end, a witness to a catastrophic failure he himself had caused. He would be executed for his transgression, his name erased from the records. He looked from the sealed blast door to the freed captive. She was watching him, her head tilted slightly, those star-filled eyes holding an unnerving intelligence. He had two choices. He could stand his ground, a loyal officer of the hegemony to the bitter end, and be cut down by his own side. Or he could throw his lot in with the unknown, the alien monster he had just unleashed. From down the corridor, he heard the heavy, rhythmic clang of mag boots on the deck plating. Scath's security team was approaching. He made his choice in the space of a single, ragged breath. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, a clear sign he had no intention of using it on her. He looked at her, his expression grim. "With me," he said, his voice hoarse. "If you want to live." He did not know if she understood his words, but she seemed to understand his intent. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Kale turned to a maintenance panel on the wall, one he had noted during his long, boring shifts. He ripped it open, exposing a tangle of conduits and wiring. His legionary training had included basic sabotage and infiltration. He knew the station's schematics better than most. With a few deft moves, he rerouted a power conduit, causing a nearby junction to overload. With a loud bang, a section of the wall panel blew outward, revealing a dark, narrow service crawlway. "This way," he grunted, pulling himself into the cramped space. She followed without hesitation, moving with a silent grace that was completely at odds with the frantic urgency of their situation. The crawlway was dark, filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of hot dust and ozone. They moved as quickly as they could, Kale leading the way, his years of tactical experience guiding their path through the station's forgotten arteries. They emerged into a cavernous cargo bay. Huge, automated cranes stood silent, their claws dangling over empty loading platforms. The air was thick with the smell of engine lubricant and ionized air from the nearby shuttle hangars. Their only way off this station was a ship. They were halfway across the open floor when a series of spotlights flooded the bay with blinding white light. Nowhere to run. Traitor. Scath's voice boomed from a network of overhead speakers, distorted and full of triumphant rage. From multiple gantries and doorways, a dozen security officers emerged, clad in black combat armor, their pulse rifles leveled. They formed a closing circle, their movements precise and disciplined. Kale instinctively dropped into a combat crouch, his hand gripping his own rifle. He was outmanned and outgunned. This was where it ended. He glanced at the woman beside him. She stood perfectly calm, her luminous skin a beacon in the harsh glare of the spotlights. She showed no fear, only a kind of focused intensity. Kale raised his rifle, preparing to sell his life as dearly as possible. He would take 2 or 3 of them with him before they cut him down. But before he could fire, she raised a hand, a gesture of quiet command. A low hum filled the air, the same resonant frequency he had felt in the containment chamber. The deck plates beneath their feet vibrated. The security officers hesitated, their aim faltering for a fraction of a second. She did not attack them. She did not unleash a blast of energy. Instead, she pushed the hum outward, a wave of pure kinetic force that was as invisible as it was powerful. It was not an explosion. It was a firm, irresistible shove. The pulse rifles flew from the officers' hands, clattering against the far walls. The men themselves were thrown back, not violently, but as if pushed by a giant, unseen hand. They stumbled and fell, their armor clanking, disarmed and disoriented but otherwise unharmed. Kale stared in astonishment. It was an act of immense power, executed with incredible restraint. She could have atomized them. Instead, she had simply removed them as a threat. She looked at him, her dark eyes seeming to ask a question. He had offered her a kindness, a cup of water. Now, she had offered him his life. The debt was paid. An alliance, unspoken and fragile, was forged between them in the echoing silence of the cargo bay. He didn't waste the opportunity. The hangars, he snapped, pointing toward a massive blast door marked with the insignia of the Cargo Transport Division. We need a ship. They ran. The alarms were still howling, but no one else tried to stop them. Scath, it seemed, was regrouping, unwilling to risk more men against a power he did not understand. Kale slammed his palm against the hangar control panel. It flashed red. Access denied. Locked down, he swore. He sealed the entire station. The woman stepped up beside him. She placed her hand flat on the control panel. The screen flickered. Lines of hegemony code scrolled past at an impossible speed, rewriting themselves. With a soft chime, the access light turned green. The massive hangar door began to grind open, revealing a short-range freighter, its landing ramp already lowered. Kale could only stare. She had not just communicated with him. She was communicating with the station's computer systems. The hegemony had imprisoned a being that could talk to their machines as easily as breathing. They scrambled up the ramp of the freighter. Kale sprinted to the cockpit, his hands flying over the controls, his old legionary pilot training coming back to him in a rush. The engines whined to life. "Strap in," he yelled, though there was no seat for her. She simply stood behind him, one hand resting on the back of his chair, as if to steady them both. He pushed the thrusters to maximum. The freighter lurched forward, clearing the hangar bay just as the external atmospheric shields began to close. They shot out into the thin, ochre atmosphere of Karen, the station shrinking behind them. On a tactical display, he saw a warning light flash. The station's defensive batteries were locking onto them. "They're not letting us go," he muttered. Before he could take evasive action, the ship shuddered. But it wasn't from a weapon's impact. A faint, silvery light enveloped the freighter, a shimmering cocoon of energy that seemed to emanate from the woman standing behind him. The incoming plasma bolts from the station's cannons struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly, like raindrops against a window. He risked a glance back at her. Her eyes were closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The light from her skin was now so bright it was hard to look at. She was the shield. She was protecting them. Kale turned his attention back to the controls and pushed the ship into a steep dive, heading for the planet's surface. Their only chance was to lose themselves in Karen's vast, unforgiving wilderness, to hide where the hegemony's sensors could not easily find them. They flew for hours, deep into the uncharted Badlands, a sprawling desert of rust-colored sand and jagged rock formations that clawed at the sky. He finally set the freighter down in the shadow of a massive canyon, the ship's engines powering down into a strained silence. The sudden quiet was overwhelming. All Cale could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart and the whisper of the wind scouring the ship's hull. He had committed treason. He had aided the escape of the hegemony's most valuable and dangerous asset. He was a fugitive on a barren world, allied with a being he could not comprehend. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. He looked at the woman. She had lowered her hand, and the intense light from her skin had subsided to its soft, pearlescent glow. She looked tired, the effort of maintaining the shield having taken its toll. They were alive. They were free. And they were utterly, completely alone. The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine of survival. By day, they sheltered in the freighter, hidden from the twin suns and the prying eyes of hegemony patrol craft. By night, they ventured out into the cold, windswept desert. Cale used his legionary survival training to find sources of water, brackish but drinkable, and to service the freighter's systems, conserving what little power they had left. His companion, whom he had started to think of as Lyra, a name that seemed to fit her silent, luminous grace, adapted to the desert with an ease that astonished him. She seemed to draw strength from the planet itself, standing for hours under the alien constellations, her face turned up to the star-dusted sky. She moved through the razor-sharp rock fields with a dancer's poise, never stumbling, never making a sound. Their communication remained unspoken, a gesture from him indicating a loose rock, a touch on his arm from her, warning him of a patrol craft's faint engine signature long before he could hear it. They shared rations in silence, a strange pair of fugitives huddled in the cramped cockpit of a stolen ship, bound by a shared enemy and a moment of connection over a cup of water. One night, while Cale was performing a diagnostic on the ship's failing life support, he cut his hand on a jagged piece of metal. It was a deep gash, and blood welled up instantly. He swore under his breath, reaching for the medkit. Lyra was at his side in an instant. Before he could react, she took his injured hand in hers. Her touch was cool and smooth. She held his hand, her gaze fixed on the wound. A soft, silvery light emanated from her palm, enveloping his hand. He felt a strange warmth spread through his skin, a tingling sensation that was not unpleasant. The pain vanished. He watched, mesmerized, as the bleeding stopped and the edges of the wound began to knit together. Within a minute, all that remained of the deep gash was a thin, pink line. In another minute, even that was gone. He pulled his hand back, staring at the unblemished skin. He looked up at her, his mind reeling. She simply watched him, her star-filled eyes holding a deep, placid calm. It was in a cave system, deep beneath the desert's surface, that she finally showed him the truth. They had been forced to abandon the freighter, its energy signature finally detected by a low-orbiting scanner. They fled on foot, traveling through a network of tunnels carved by ancient water flows. They found shelter in a vast cavern, where strange, phosphorescent crystals cast a soft, blue-green light on the walls. Cale had collapsed from exhaustion, his body pushed to its limit. Lyra sat beside him in the cool darkness. She reached out and gently placed her fingertips on his temples. His world dissolved. He was no longer in the cave. He was standing in a place of immense light and energy. Below him was a sea of molten, glowing power, the core of Karen. But it was not just a geological phenomenon. It was alive. It pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a colossal heart. And all around him were others of her kind. They were beings of light and energy, their forms shimmering, indistinct. They were not solid, but they were real. He saw them tending to the core, their movements like a graceful, intricate dance, guiding the flows of energy, soothing the planet's violent geothermal temper. They were not monsters. They were gardeners. They were guardians. They were the Lumina, and they were one with the planet. He saw the arrival of the hegemony. He saw the massive drills, like obscene metal fangs, piercing the planet's crust. He felt the planet's agony as a physical shock. The hegemony did not see a living system. They saw a resource, a well of power to be tapped and drained. The Lumina had tried to stop them, to warn them, but their attempts to communicate were interpreted as attacks. The hegemony responded with overwhelming force, their weapons tearing through the Guardian's light forms, disrupting the delicate balance of the core. He saw Lyra. She was young, powerful. She had fought back, not with malice, but with desperation, trying to protect her home. It was her burst of defensive energy that had destroyed the first contact team. The hegemony had captured her, torn her away from the core, from her people, and imprisoned her in the cold, sterile darkness of Station Erebos, hoping to sever her connection and control the energy through her. The vision faded, leaving Kale gasping on the floor of the cave. The images burned into his mind. He understood now. The hegemony were not just miners. They were parasites, killing their host. Administrator Forlag, the station's commander, was not just an officer. He was a butcher, overseeing the slow murder of a world. As the last vestiges of the vision receded, another image bled through, this one from his own mind. It was a memory he kept buried deep. A firefight on a jungle world, the smell of burning vegetation and ozone, the face of a young legionary beside him, a boy he had trained, calling his name just before being consumed by an enemy plasma blast. Kale felt the old, familiar agony of that failure, the guilt that had hollowed him out and left him a cynical shell. He felt Lyra's presence in his mind, not as an intruder, but as a gentle witness. She did not judge. She simply saw his pain, his scar. He felt her share in his grief, a silent acknowledgement of his own trauma. He opened his eyes. Lyra was watching him, her own eyes luminous with unshed tears of light. She reached out and gently touched the old scar tissue on his cheek, a physical remnant of a long-forgotten battle. In that moment, the chasm between human and alien, between soldier and guardian, vanished. They were just two survivors, scarred by the same brutal galaxy. Their shared ordeal had forged a bond of reliance. This moment of shared vulnerability forged a bond of understanding. Kale was no longer just a fugitive trying to save his own skin. He was fighting for a cause. Their flight could not last forever. Warden Scath was a relentless hunter, and his obsession with capturing them was personal now. He had lost face, and he would not stop until he had Kale in chains and Lyra back in a containment cell. He cornered them in a derelict mining outpost, a ghost town of prefabricated structures half buried in the shifting sands. Scath arrived not with a squad, but with a company, supported by armored hover tanks. He meant to leave nothing to chance. The battle was short and brutal. Kale used his knowledge of legionary tactics, setting traps, using the crumbling buildings for cover, fighting a guerrilla war against a superior force. Lyra fought alongside him, her power now a focused, defensive weapon. She erected shields of light that deflected plasma bolts. She sent out waves of kinetic force that toppled the hover tanks. She moved like a phantom through the chaos. But there were too many of them. Kale took a plasma bolt to the leg, the impact searing through his armor and flesh, sending him crashing to the ground. Scath's soldiers closed in, a ring of black armor and glowing rifle muzzles. Scath himself strode forward, his helmet retracted, his face a mask of triumphant fury. "It's over, traitor," he spat. "You should have stayed a janitor." As he raised his pistol to execute Kale, a blinding light erupted from the center of the outpost. Lyra stood there, no longer a figure of grace, but a being of pure, incandescent rage. The ground shook. The air crackled with power. She was preparing to unleash the full force of her connection to the planet. She would incinerate them all, Scath, his soldiers, the entire outpost, and likely herself in the process. Kale, lying in the dust, his leg a ruin of agony, cried out, not with words, but with a desperate plea he projected with all his will. "Don't. You'll destroy yourself." She hesitated. The blinding light faltered. In that moment of distraction, Scath's soldiers opened fire. Dozens of plasma bolts converged on her. Kale watched in horror, but the bolts never reached her. They were caught, suspended in midair, held in a shimmering, invisible field. From the sky, a shadow fell over them. The short-range freighter they had abandoned days ago descended, its landing ramp already lowering. At the controls was Overseer Valerius. "Get in," Valerius's voice crackled over the ship's external speakers. "Now." Lyra deflected the plasma bolts into the sky and created a wall of kinetic force that threw Scath and his men into disarray. She scooped up the wounded Kale as if he weighed nothing and carried him onto the freighter. The ramp closed, and the ship rocketed away, leaving Scath screaming in impotent fury amidst the wreckage. Inside the ship, Valerius injected Kale's leg with a powerful painkiller and a coagulant. "I always knew you were a trouble magnet, Kale," the old overseer grumbled, his hands surprisingly steady as he worked. "What are you doing here?" Kale grunted through the pain. "My job," Valerius said, not looking at him. "Overseeing things. I've been monitoring Scatha's communications." He was acting without Administrator Forlag's direct authority. His obsession made him reckless. He finished patching Kale's leg. "I also ran a deep archive search on specimen 734 after you departed. The original survey data. The unredacted reports. What the hegemony is doing here, it's not just unethical. It's unsustainable." Lyra projected a new vision into their minds, a terrifying one. It showed the planet's core, now dangerously unstable from the hegemony's relentless drilling and the disruption of the Lumina. It was developing fractures, threatening a cataclysmic rupture that would not only destroy Karen, but would trigger a supernova in its primary sun. It would sterilize the entire system. "We can't win a direct fight," Kale said, the terrible truth dawning on him. "Even if we could, it wouldn't stop the core from collapsing. The damage is already done." Lyra then showed them the solution. The only solution. The core needed a new regulator. One of the Lumina elders would have traditionally taken the role, merging their consciousness with the planet to stabilize it. But they were gone, scattered, or destroyed by the hegemony. And the core was now contaminated by hegemony technology, the deep-bore drills, the energy taps. A purely organic mind, like one of the Lumina, could no longer interface with it properly. It required a hybrid consciousness, a mind that could understand both the organic, living energy of the planet and the rigid, logical systems of human technology. It needed a bridge. It needed a human volunteer. The process she showed them was terrifying. The volunteer would have to go to the main control chamber on Station Erebos, directly above the primary drilling shaft, and open a direct conduit to the core. The raw energy of the planet would surge up and consume them, breaking down their physical body and merging their consciousness with the geothermal matrix. They would cease to be a person. They would become a part of the planet, a living, thinking regulator, their existence stretched out over millennia as a silent, sleepless guardian. It was not death. It was a permanent, irrevocable sacrifice of self. Silence filled the cockpit. Valerius looked grim. Kale stared at the bulkhead, his mind a whirlwind. He thought of his life, the meaningless patrols on Erebos, the ghosts of his past in the Legion. He had been a tool for the hegemony, a cog in a machine of conquest and exploitation. He had lived a life of duty without purpose. Now, he was being offered a death with one. He looked at Lyra. He saw in her eyes the hope and the sorrow of this impossible choice. She had shown him what was worth fighting for. Not a flag, not a contract, but a world, a people, a future. His cynicism, the armor he had worn for so long, felt like a lead weight. He let it fall away. "I'll do it," Kale said. His voice was quiet, but it held a certainty that surprised even himself. Valerius looked at him, his old, tired eyes filled with a reluctant respect. "There's no coming back from this, Kale." "There was never any coming back for me anyway," Kale replied. He turned to Lyra. "Take us back to the station." To the Administrator's control center. Their return to Station Erebos was one of stealth and desperation. Valerius used his overseer codes to slice through the outer security layers, guiding the freighter into a deserted maintenance bay. From there, they moved through the station's service corridors, ghosts in the machine. Kale's leg was a throbbing ruin, but he pushed the pain aside, leaning on Lyra for support. They reached the central spire, the administrative heart of the station. The final chamber was protected by an elite guard of hegemony shock troopers, Scatha's personal guard. Administrator Forlag was inside, directing the planet-wide hunt from his command throne. They were discovered as they breached the final corridor. Alarms shrieked. Troopers opened fire. Valerius laid down covering fire with a pulse carbine, the old soldier moving with deadly efficiency. Lyra became a shield, a whirlwind of kinetic force, protecting them as they advanced. They burst into the command center. It was a vast, circular room, dominated by a huge holographic display of Karen, red alerts flashing across its surface. Administrator Forlag stood from his chair, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Warden Scath was at his side, a look of pure hatred on his face as he saw Kale. "Seal the room," Forlag commanded. Blast shields slammed down over the doors, trapping them. Kale, Lyra, and Valerius stood before the two architects of Karen's demise and a dozen heavily armed guards. They were surrounded, wounded, and hopelessly outgunned. It was an impossible standoff. "You have caused this hegemony a great deal of trouble, ex-legionary," Forlag said, his voice cold and precise. He was a man of numbers and reports, a bureaucrat for whom this was all just a complex resource management problem. "Your treason ends here. Warden, deal with them." Scath drew his sidearm, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Any last request, traitor?" he sneered. Kale pushed himself off Lyra, standing on his own, his wounded leg screaming in protest. He ignored the pain. He looked past Scath, his gaze locking with the administrators. "A chair," Kale said, his voice calm and clear in the tense silence. Scath faltered. Forlag raised an eyebrow. The request was so absurd, so completely out of place, that it momentarily broke their momentum. "What?" Forlag asked, genuinely confused. "I request a chair," Kale repeated. Protocol 7, Subsection 4. A captured officer of legionary rank is permitted a final dignity before summary execution. He was making it up, but he delivered the lie with the deadpan certainty of a man quoting scripture. Forlag, a slave to procedure, hesitated. He glanced at Scath, then nodded to one of the guards. "Get him a chair." A simple metal chair was brought and placed in the center of the room. Kale limped to it and sat down, the relief on his leg exquisite. He was now the calm center of a storm of armed men. He folded his hands in his lap and looked directly at the administrator. "Administrator Forlag," Kale began, his tone shifting from that of a prisoner to that of a diplomat. "I am here to negotiate the terms of your surrender." A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by Scath's incredulous laughter. "He's gone mad," the warden choked out. "Listen to me very carefully," Kale continued, his voice low and intense, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "In approximately 17 minutes, the geothermal core of this planet will suffer a catastrophic rupture. Your drills have fractured the primary regulatory channels. The feedback loop is irreversible." Forlag's expression tightened. "That's impossible. Our sensors show instability, but it is manageable. Your sensors are designed to measure energy output, not the integrity of a living system you don't even comprehend," Kale countered. "Lyra," he said, nodding to her, "is linked to that core. Her people were its guardians. Her death, or even her continued separation from it, is accelerating the collapse. When she dies, the planet dies. And when the planet dies, its sun goes supernova. Your fleet in orbit will be the first to be vaporized." He let that sink in. Forlag was a man of data. Kale was giving him a new, terrifying variable he could not compute. "This is a bluff," Scath snarled, raising his pistol again. "Is it?" Kale asked calmly. "Look at her. Do you really want to take that chance? I am the only one who can pacify her. The only one who can interface with her and guide her to stabilize the core. But I will only do so after you have ordered a full withdrawal of all hegemony forces from this system. You will release this world. That is the price of your survival." He was buying time. He was creating a sliver of doubt, a moment of hesitation. Forlag looked from Kale to Lyra, his analytical mind warring with his ingrained arrogance. The fate of his command, his fleet, hung in the balance, resting on the word of a traitor and the existence of a power he refused to believe in. Scath had no such hesitation. "Lies," he roared, his fanaticism overriding all reason. He lunged forward, not at Kale, but at Lyra, his pistol aimed at her head. "I'll kill the monster myself." It was the distraction Kale needed. Lyra moved like lightning, not to attack, but to defend. A shield of pure light flared into existence around her, absorbing the plasma bolt. In that single, chaotic moment, as all eyes were on the confrontation between Scath and Lyra, Kale turned to the master control console behind his chair. Valerius was already there, having anticipated the move, and had bypassed the primary security lockouts. Kale slammed his hand onto the main panel. Now, he yelled. He activated the emergency purge command for the central drill shaft, opening a direct, unfiltered conduit to the planet's core. A column of incandescent white energy, brighter than a sun, erupted from the floor in the center of the room. It was not hot. It was something beyond temperature, a torrent of pure, raw creation. The sound was the ringing of 1,000,000,000 crystal bells and the roar of a dying star all at once. Kill did not hesitate. He stood from the chair, took a single, final step, and walked into the light. The pain was absolute, a fire that burned away his flesh, his bones, his very name. He was unmade, his atoms torn apart and scattered. But his consciousness remained, stretched and expanded, flowing down the conduit of light into the heart of the world. He felt the planet's agony, the deep, groaning wounds of the hegemony's drills. He felt the panicked, chaotic energy of the destabilized core. He reached out with his mind, no longer Kale the soldier, but something new, something vast. He found the broken channels, the fractured flows of energy. He remembered the logic of hegemony systems, the cold, precise language of machines. He took control of the drills still buried deep in the planet's mantle, not as weapons, but as tools. He used them to create new conduits, rerouting the pressure, weaving the torn fabric of the core back together. He felt Lyra's mind join with his, a guiding hand in the storm. She showed him the planet's natural rhythms, the ancient pathways of power. Together, they worked, a bridge of flesh and light, of man and God, of machine and soul. He became the anchor. He became the seal. He became the regulator. In the command center, the light receded, the roar subsiding to a gentle, steady hum. Where Kale had stood, there was nothing left. The energy conduit from the core was gone, replaced by a smooth, newly fused section of the floor. A wave of profound peace washed through the station, a psionic calm that settled over every person inside. The red alerts on the holographic display flickered and died, replaced by steady green indicators. On the main screen, the data feeds from the orbital fleet showed the planet-wide energy spikes had vanished. Karen was stable. The threat was over. Forlag stared at the spot where Kale had been, his face pale, his composure shattered. Scaff lay on the floor, knocked unconscious by Lyra's defensive pulse. The war for Karen had ended not with a bang, but with a silent, awe-inspiring sacrifice. 10 years later, Karen was no longer an ochre wasteland. A faint green blush of nascent vegetation spread through the canyons. The atmosphere, once thin and toxic, was thickening, becoming breathable in the lower elevations. The twin suns no longer seemed to scorch the land, their light softened by a thin veil of high-altitude clouds. The planet was healing. The hegemony was gone. Faced with a phenomenon they could not explain or control, and presented with an official report by Overseer Valerius that detailed the ecological cataclysm they had nearly caused, they had withdrawn. Karen was declared a quarantine zone, a protected sanctuary. Valerius, now retired, stood at the entrance to what had once been the command center of Station Erebos. The station had been decommissioned, left in a silent, geosynchronous orbit, a monument to past follies. He was an old man now, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were clear. Beside him stood Lyra. She was no longer a prisoner, but the ambassador for her people, who were slowly re-emerging from the deep places of the world. They were rebuilding their connection to the core, a core that now beat with a steady, peaceful rhythm. The command center had been turned into a shrine. The room was kept dark, save for a single soft light source. In the exact center of the chamber, where Kale had stepped into the light, a crystalline structure had grown from the floor. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, a silent, unmoving figure of translucent, glowing crystal. A soft, gentle light pulsed from within it, in time with the faint hum that now filled the room. It was Kale, or what was left of him. He was the planet's new heart, its silent, eternal guardian. Valerius placed a hand on the cool, smooth surface of the crystal. "He saved us all," the old man said, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra did not speak in words, but her thoughts touched his mind, a feeling of serene, melancholic peace. "He is not gone," she communicated. "His consciousness is the song the planet now sings." He is the light in the crystals, the warmth in the ground, the whisper of the new wind. He did not die. He found his peace. Valerius nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He looked at the crystalline man, the soldier who had found his purpose not in fighting a war, but in becoming the peace that followed it. His sacrifice was not forgotten. It was in every new leaf, every drop of clean water, every breath of fresh air on the world he had saved. And in the silent heart of a healing planet, Kale was finally home.